What's up guys, welcome to my Holy Paladin healing guide for Legion patch 7.1. Now in this guide I'm going to go over your spells and abilities, your talents, your artifact traits and paladin choices, your stat priority, and your healing rotation or priority, if you will, as well as a brief description of your DPS rotation if you're interested in that, and demonstrations of those, and then just some macros and add-ons that you can use, that I use, that you might find kind of helpful. Let's go ahead and talk about your spells and abilities. The first spell I want to talk about is Holy Shock, and it's kind of your bread and butter as a Holy Paladin. It's a short cooldown, which is reduced by haste spell, instant cast. It does healing to people if they're friendly, and it does damage to enemies if you use it on them. Now, you note that it does have double the normal crit strike chance, so in my case I have about 39% crit, so Holy Shock would have about 78% crit chance. Now this is important because of this passive that's attached to it called Infusion of Light. And what this does is, when you crit with your Holy Shock, you buff one of two spells, and you can kind of choose which one. The first is Holy Light, and Holy Light is a slow cast, as you can see. And it just does healing, and it's pretty efficient mana-wise. And then the other spell is Flash of Light, which does about the same amount of healing, a little bit more, as you can see here. But it's much quicker, and it costs more mana. So it's less mana efficient, but casts quicker. Now, this buff, so if you crit with your Holy Shock, your Holy Light, if you choose to use it on that, will be a much faster cast. So you can see it's just under a second now, rather than the 2.4 from before. And if you use it on Flash of Light, it increases the healing it does by 50%. Now, for AoE healing, you do have Light of Dawn, and this is a more expensive spell, not super expensive, but it is pretty pricey, and it has a cooldown reduced by haste. And basically, you do a cone heal in front of you, and heals up to 5 allies, as you can see. And then finally, for baseline heals, you have Light of the Martyr. This is a very cheap heal, but it also does damage to you based on how much you heal. So half the amount that you've healed someone for, you take in damage. And it also doesn't work, it doesn't proc your Beacon of Light. Now, what your Beacon of Light does is when you put it on somebody, so say you put it on myself, when you heal someone else, it will heal your beacon target for 40% of the heals that happened. So if I heal this dummy, you'll see that I take some healing as well from this beacon. So just note that Light of the Martyr does not proc that, so it does less healing generally than some of the other single target spells. And that beacon, also do note that when you heal the beacon target with Flash of Light or Holy Light, you actually get some mana refunded. So 30% of that mana gets refunded to you if you need to spam heals on the beacon target. Alright, now let's talk about defensive or kind of healing cooldowns that you have. The first one I want to talk about is Tear's Deliverance. This is a 1.5 minute cooldown, and basically after you finish casting it, it heals allies around you within 15 yards, and it heals one person at a time. But it does jump to different targets, or it can if it chooses to, and every time it heals someone, it applies a buff that makes them take more healing from your Holy Light and Flash of Light. So it looks something like this. You'll cast it, and then it'll start to heal once per second. So you'll heal this one maybe, and then this one, and it applies that buff that makes them take more healing. So it's kind of somewhere in between a single target heal and an AoE heal, and it's very nifty, and it's also free, so it has no mana cost. Now you also have Avenging Wrath, which is your Wings cooldown. So 2 minute cooldown, and it basically makes your healing go up by a lot. So you get 35% more healing and 20% more crits. The last part on this tooltip is from a talent, which we'll get into later. But just know it's basically so you pump out more heals. So it's kind of a personal healing cooldown, but it can be used as like a mini raid cooldown if you need to. Speaking of raid cooldowns, the main one that you have is Aura Mastery. It's a 3 minute cooldown, and it empowers your level 60 talent, so it depends on what you pick here, and we'll go into those in more depth. Just note, basically, you could choose between damage reduction or kind of AoE heal like a Trank or Divine Hymn style thing. And then it also increases the range of that aura by, well, from 10 yards to 40 yards, so it becomes much bigger and you don't have to stack to get the benefits of that cooldown, which is very, very nice. And finally, we got Lay on Hands here, and this is a 10 minute cooldown. Baseline artifact traits right now are making mine lower, and it heals your target for your full health, so about 2.4 million in my case, and it does apply a debuff called Forbearance, and Forbearance just makes it so that any other ability that causes Forbearance cannot be used on that target until it goes away. So just do note that. And we'll get into that a little bit more, what other abilities do cause that. Now, as far as defensive cooldowns go, we do have Divine Protection, 1 minute cooldown, 20% damage reduction, 8 seconds. Mine's a little longer, artifact traits. You also have Divine Shield, kind of your emergency self-save button here. And it's a 5-minute cooldown, and basically makes you immune to everything. It removes all debuffs off you if they're removable at all. And again, immunity for 8 seconds. It does cause forbearance, so if you use Divine Shield or you use Lay on Hands recently, you can't use the other, etc. It looks like this, very cool, shiny bubble. Now, as far as utility goes, you've got a lot of utility as a Holy Paladin. And the first is Blessing of Freedom. You cast it and you get this little buff, and it removes all roots and snares for the duration, and you're also immune to those effects while it's still on you. You also have Blessing of Sacrifice, which is kind of a tank cooldown, if you will, or defensive cooldown for someone else. It's a 2.5 minute cooldown baseline, and you put it on someone, and 30% of the damage they take instead goes to you. So it's kind of like a 30% damage reduction for them, except that you're taking the damage instead. But if you fall below 20% health, it will break the effect. It won't kill you instantly. But do be careful about using it, because you can still get low and then, raid damage comes out and kills you. So kind of tricky to use. Be careful with it, but it is there to help save tanks and such if you need to. And then finally we do have Blessing of Protection, which is a 5-minute cooldown again, and it puts a blessing on someone that you choose. And basically they're immune to physical damage and physical debuffs, so it'll remove physical debuffs from them, and then it causes forbearance. So again, like the other abilities, if they have forbearance, you can't use this on them until it's gone, until forbearance is gone. Now, let's go over the damage spells briefly. And you do have a few as a Holy Paladin. The first I'm going to talk about is, well, briefly mention again, Holy Shock technically can be damage. So same as spells before, but can be damage. You also have Crusader Strike, which is a melee ability, and you just swing like so. It just does a little damage, got 2 charges, short cooldown, reduced by haste. And then we have Judgment. Now Judgment is just a longer cooldown, you just throw a hammer like that, and it applies this debuff that makes the target take more damage from your Crusader Strike and Holy Shock for the duration. So, just a nice ability there. And then you have Consecration for AoE, just drops this little zone around you and it does damage to things standing in it. Next we've got our Dispels, of course, so Cleanse. This dispels poison, disease, and magic effects. We also have our Stun in Hammer of Justice. And then for movement speed, we have Divine Steed, which is a 45-second cooldown. And you just mount, you basically epic mount for 3 seconds, no matter where you are. And it's pretty nifty and cool, gets you places you need to go. And then we get Taunt, in case you need to use that for something like off-tanking with maybe Blessing of Protection, Divine Shield, something. It is there if you need it. And finally, just as a quick mention, we do have Resurrection, of course, called Redemption, single target, and we have a Mass Resurrection called Absolution. Now let's go ahead and look at your talents. At level 15, you've got 3 cool choices. The first is Bestow Faith. 12-second cooldown, puts a buff on the target, and then after that buff goes away, so after 5 seconds, it heals them. So it's can be a little weird to use, and a lot of people don't like that necessarily, but it's really good in like raid situations, for example. If you can predict the damage that's coming in, or if you just put on a tank that's actively tanking a lot of damage, it'll get value, and it's very efficient mana-wise, and does a good amount of healing. But in things like Mythic Plus, maybe not so much if you're not comfortable that it's not going to be wasted, that healing. And there are other choices if you want in those kinds of situations, but it is a really good talent for healing in general. Now, Light's Hammer is a 1-minute cooldown, and basically you throw a hammer on the ground, and it heals everything in it that's friendly, and it does damage to things that are not friendly, so it hits enemies as well. And this can be really good if your raid group or your dungeon group is stacked a lot, or just as a nice AoE cooldown. Again, you need to make sure people are stacked in it to get full value. So this can be really good if you want that kind of a thing, that AoE ground cooldown, and if you can take advantage of it. It is a little more expensive mana-wise than Bestow Faith, even if you spam this on cooldown over the minute, but it is a very viable option in those situations. Now, Crusader's Might, it's a passive. It makes it so that your Crusader Strike reduces the cooldown of Holy Shock and Light of Dawn. And basically, if you want to play Shockedin at all, if you want to do damage, or in dungeons, if you want to add damage again to like the start of a boss fight or something, this is pretty much your go-to for that. Technically, it can give you a little bit more healing, because your Holy Shock and Light of Dawn come off cooldown faster, but generally the healing output's not as good as Bestow Faith, and it does require you to go into melee range, which is not always favorable, but definitely has its uses, especially if you're trying to do damage or help out with damage at certain parts. This can be really, really nice. Now level 30, you got 3 different talents. The first is a movement speed talent, Cavalier. It gives you 2 charges of Divine Steed, pretty simple. Unbreakable Spirit reduces the cooldown on your Divine Shield, Divine Protection, and Lay on Hands by 30%. So you get more of those cooldowns more often, and can be really good if you think you need those. And then Rule of Law, it's a 30-second recharge, 2 charge ability, and it increases the range of your heals and the reach of your Mastery, which just know for now that Mastery heals, it helps you heal more the closer the target is to you. So it increases that range by 50% as well as the range of your heals, and can be really useful in raids. It's kind of the only healing relevant spell in raids, or choice in this tier, if you're spread out, say like on Odin perhaps, right, where you're really, really spread out. But if you're stacked up, obviously this is quite useless because it just increases the range, and if you're all stacked up, you don't have range problems. But it's really good for those situations when you're spread out and such, and if not, you can take one of the other 2, and in Mythic Plus, I definitely recommend one of the other 2. Rule of Law, generally, you won't find much use for in a Mythic Plus run, so either more movement or more defensives. Now, level 45 is all CC, so Fist of Justice. Every time you Judgment an enemy, you reduce the cooldown on Hammer of Justice by 10 seconds, so to get you your stun more often, but you do have to do a little bit more work for it. Repentance, short cast, CC, I don't generally recommend it unless your group is very lacking in single target CC and you do want that for some reason. Maybe like Pelters or Neltharian's Lair, for example, on teaming. So you can use this, it just incapacitates them for a minute and does a little bit of damage over the 1 minute that it is CC'd. And then Blinding Light is your other option. It's kind of my go-to for Holy Paladin, but of course it's kind of up to you. It's a 1.5 minute cooldown, and you shoot out this cool light show here, and it just AoE stuff, and it disorients whatever it hits. But it also does a decent amount of damage, which is why I take it. You can add some extra damage, plus it's kind of an AoE interrupt in a sense. If there are adds and stuff and trash, then that disorient will stop them from casting. They'll probably break pretty quickly, because any non-holy damage will break that disorient, but you can use it to temporarily interrupt the cast. So I generally go with this, especially in Mythic Plus, but whatever suits your needs and tastes. Now level 60 is a really important tier. This is the Aura talent tier that relates to Aura Mastery, your 3 minute cooldown. I'll go over them in turn. So Devotion Aura basically makes it so that allies within 10 yards take less damage, but it's split over how many people. So right now, because I'm in range of 2 things, there's 3 of us, so me and 2 dummies, in that 10-yard area, so they're all taking approximately 6% less damage instead of the 20% that's baseline. Now, when you pop Aura Mastery with this, everything in that range, that 40-yard range, because Aura Mastery gets the full 20% damage reduction. So it becomes like old Devotion Aura, essentially, in which everyone gets a 20% damage reduction, as long as they're close enough to you. It's a really, really powerful defensive cooldown, especially on things like maybe Mythic Ursoc. When he charges, and if you're progressing, this can completely save 1 charge, stuff like that. Very, very potent. Now, Aura of Mercy is the other one I want to talk about. It kind of heals. It's a passive heal. So it heals up to 3 allies every second, just within 10 yards. Just passively, you get this free healing. And when you pop Aura Mastery, it heals everyone in the area instead of just 3, and it doubles the healing of it. So it becomes like a kind of a weaker Divine Hymn or Tranquility style cooldown, except you don't have to channel it. So you just pop Aura Mastery and then you get extra healing. It's pretty cool. Now, Aura Sacrifice, when you're above 75% health, 10% of all the damage that people are taking within 10 yards around you, you take that damage instead. But once you dip below 75% health, it stops. So it's not really the greatest passive effect, because 1, you're taking extra damage, and 2, it's probably not active that often because you're going to be dipping below 75% probably fairly often if you're taking damage from other people, depending on the fight, of course. Now, once you pop Aura Mastery, 15% of your effective healing, so all the healing that you do, is duplicated to everyone in the aura. Now, that's a pretty powerful cooldown. The only thing is, versus Aura of Mercy, which is closer to because it's extra healing rather than damage reduction, you don't have to pop anything for Aura of Mercy. You don't have to do any other heals to get full value with it. Whereas for Aura of Sacrifice, say you can't cast or you can't do effective healing for whatever reason because you have to handle something else, you're going to be losing out on a lot of that value during that 8-second window of Devotion Aura. So, generally, I recommend Aura of Mercy if you want more healing, and Devotion Aura if you want to prevent one-shot mechanics in raids or dungeons or whatever that could wipe the whole group, and you're like, I just want Devotion Aura to prevent that one-shot so we have a chance to live through it. So it's kind of up to you and your situation and what you need. So level 75, we got 3 throughput talents or efficiency talents. Now, Divine Purpose basically makes it so that your Light of Dawn and Holy Shock have a chance to not start their cooldown. So they reset their cooldown essentially, and it becomes free for the next cast. So this is really good if you're having mana issues, especially on, say, progression fights or something, in which you might need those extra free casts. So that's when I would recommend this, but it is a little RNG based, so that can be unappealing to some people. Now, if you don't want that, or you don't need that because you're not running out of mana, I recommend Holy Avenger. 1.5 minute cooldown gives you 30% haste, and your Holy Shock healing is buffed by 30%, for 20 seconds. So, really, really good cooldown. It's kind of a mini cooldown that you can add to your list and use when you need to. And also it's really good for doing DPS, because even though it's just the Holy Shock healing that's increased, the haste increase is nice to reduce cooldowns of your DPS abilities. So your Judgment, your Crusader Strike, and your Holy Shock, and your Consecration. So Holy Prism, 20-second cooldown, and if you use it on yourself or an ally, it heals that person, and then it splits off and does damage to 5 nearby enemies. And if you use it on an enemy, it does damage to that one enemy and heals 5 nearby people instead, your 5 friendlies around them. So it's pretty cool, and it does give more constant healing, but the problem is it's kind of expensive mana-wise, and it basically does as much healing as Light of Dawn, or actually a little bit less. So it's not the most efficient heal versus having like another cooldown or more mana efficiency, but you can use it. It does have its uses. If you're trying to do like AoE DPS, if you're just trying to get more constant and consistent AoE healing, you could go with this. I don't generally recommend it, but it has its uses. So I would generally recommend Holy Avenger in most situations. Like I said, Divine Purpose for mana efficiency in raids, and in dungeons, Holy Avenger because mana efficiency is not as important because you can drink in between trash packs. And also this allows you to kind of rotate. You can either double up on Avenging Wrath and Holy Avenger to get huge healing cooldowns, or you can rotate through them so you don't have to stop and wait for cooldowns from either the tank or yourself, stuff like that. So generally I do recommend this in most situations, but the other two definitely have their uses. Now level 90, Sanctified Wrath is going to be your default, your go-to for pretty much all situations. It makes Avenging Wrath last 25% longer, and it also reduces Holy Shock's cooldown by 50% during Avenging Wrath. So it just makes Avenging Wrath a much bigger cooldown for you, because you can spam Holy Shock more, and it lasts longer, so you can heal even longer with that buff. Now, Judgment of Light for raids is really good if nobody else is doing it. So if you don't have a prop paladin who has it, or if you don't have another Holy Paladin who's doing this already, then this is really good. And basically when you Judgment someone with this, so if you Judgment an enemy, you'll see it applies this debuff called Judgment of Light, and when people attack that target, they get healed for a little bit. And it has a small internal cooldown, like 1 second, but it has 40 charges, so if you keep that up, it's a lot of raid healing for your entire raid, and it's kind of nice because you don't really have that much AoE healing, other than Light of Dawn and Beacon if you count that, of course. So it's kind of nice to have that, but if someone else already has the talent, it doesn't double up, so it's actually wasted if you both have it. So if you're not comfortable with using Judgment, just to make sure you have this kept up on the boss, or if there are a lot of targets, like on Il'gynoth, for example, this isn't that great, then you can go Sanctified Wrath instead. And no, you're never going to be wrong, per se, in going Sanctified Wrath. It's just, you can always get value out of it. But this is really good for raids, especially single target bosses, if no one else is handling that. Now, Fervent Martyr, it makes it so that when you cast Holy Light or Flash of Light on your Beacon of Light target, it reduces the cost of your next Light of the Martyr by 50%. So, this kind of helps you if you're really into the Light of the Martyr playstyle. We just spam that a lot. I don't generally recommend it though, because one, you're forced to heal your beacon target in order to proc that, so you're kind of limited on who you have to heal. And then two, I don't really recommend Light of the Martyr play that much, but again, some people really like it and find success doing it, so, you know, kind of up to you if you want to play with that. Now, level 100, you got 3 beacon talents. Now, the first one I want to talk about is Beacon of Faith. This basically adds another beacon, so to your Beacon of Light, so you now have Beacon of Faith. You can put that on another target. So now you have 2 beacons. Now, they do a little bit less healing, so 20% less, it's like 32% of your heals on each target, instead of the 40% from original beacon. And so you see if I heal this dummy, you'll see that both that dummy and myself get a portion of that heal. Very useful on fights, generally in raids, in which both tanks are taking constant heavy damage and the raid is also taking damage, so that you can kind of help focus like raid healing sort of, while still attending to both tanks. So fights like Ursoc or Sonarius come to mind, maybe Guarm, things like that. So really good for those situations. Now, if you don't find yourself in those situations or you don't like it, you can just take Beacon of the Lightbringer instead. And this makes it so that your mastery, which is normally centered around you, and your mastery essentially makes it so that the closer you are to your target, the more you heal them. It makes it, this beacon talent makes it so that it also centers around your beacon target. So if they're really close to your beacon target, they get more heals as if that were you right there. So this can be really good if your raid is like split, for example. So like melee and range group. So you're in the range group, tanks in the melee, you have beacon on the tank. They're all getting your big buffed mastery heals. Or just in general, it's kind of as a default raid talent. And it also increases the healing and range of your Light of Dawn by 30%, which is a nice passive benefit to have, and which is why it can be a nice default choice as well, in case you don't think Beacon of Faith is going to get full value. Now, Beacon of Virtue replaces your Beacon of Light. It turns into this Beacon of Virtue. It's got a 15-second cooldown, and what it does is it applies a Beacon of Light to whoever you target and up to 3 people within 30 yards. So you basically have 4 beacons for 8 seconds on that cooldown, and you get the full benefit, so it's 40% copied healing to everyone. This is really, really potent for Mythic Plus, because you don't have that many AoE heals, so this gives you another option. So you just pop this, you hit 4 out of 5 of the people in your group, and you can, possibly heal one of them if they really need it, or you can heal the last person who's not beaconed, and you're just healing everyone for 8 seconds with your powerful single target heals. It's really, really good for those situations. I don't generally recommend it for raids because it's very mana inefficient, because you're not getting those free beacon heals to your tanks, since it's on a cooldown. But it can be useful if you really need that extra healing. Plus, it hits less people proportionally in a raid than it does in a dungeon, because in the dungeon there's less people. But really, really powerful for Mythic Plus, and is where I would generally recommend it. And again, if you don't want to, for whatever reason, you could just go with Beacon of Lightbringer in Mythic Plus. But kind of up to you there. Let's go ahead and talk about your artifact traits and pathing choices. So you start down here at Tears Deliverance, and then you go up here to Virtues of the Light. And after that, what you really want is a shock treatment. Now to get there, I recommend going left first, because we're going to go for this golden trait after. So pick up this Knight of the Silver Hand. Kind of crappy, just when you judgment someone, you take less damage for a little bit. Then you grab Shock Treatment, buffs your crit strike damage and healing of Holy Shock by 8% per level, which is pretty significant because it's one of your major heals. And then you go down here, grab this buff to Avenging Wrath. Vindicator makes it so that your Avenging Wrath also increases the critical healing that you do by 25%, so when you crit, you do more healing than normal. And then Deliver the Light, extra healing from Holy Light and Flash of Light, very nice. And then you go grab Power of the Silver Hand. Now what this does is, you'll get this proc every so often, and when you do proc it off your Holy Light or Flash of Light, the healing that you do is kind of added to your Holy Shock, your next Holy Shock, and it takes 10% of the healing that you do during that 10-second period. So if you did 100k healing after this proc, then your next Holy Shock would do 10k more healing. So it's kind of a nice constant RNG proc buff to your healing. Now after that, I recommend going to the right. Grab Second Sunrise. It gives Addons a chance to cast a second time, just for free, and it'll just proc. You'll see it like flash once and then flash twice if it procs, and it's free if it does that, so it's very nice to have for extra AoE healing. Templar of the Light buffs your Aura Mastery duration by 2 seconds, and then Focused Healing reduces your hand's cooldown, and then you'll grab Protection of Tear. Now this buffs your Aura Mastery and makes it so that it also increases the healing that all the affected party and raid members take by 15%. So it makes it more like a Divine Hymn, buffing the healing that they take from everyone, and it's very, very cool. It makes your cooldown even better. Now at that point, I'd actually go a different route than I went. I accidentally went up this way because I thought I had more need for this, but I would recommend going up the left here. Grab extra healing from Light of Dawn, and then grab a cooldown reduction on all of your blessings. Your Blessing of Freedom, Protection, and Sacrifice, because it'll let you use them more often, which is really cool. And then grab this golden trait. Now this one makes it so that when your beacon target drops below 50% health, your next Holy Light or Flashlight on that target will heal them for double. But it can only happen every 30 seconds, so it's kind of like mini cooldown based on health dropping, so it's kind of weird, but it is there, and it can help you pick up a tank or someone who's taken a lot of damage very quickly if they have your beacon. At that point, it's kind of up to you. I'd grab Share the Burden probably, and that just reduces the damage that you take from Blessing of Sacrifice, so that it's less dangerous for you to use it. And then finally grab Justice through Sacrifice. Increases the healing done by your Light of the Martyr. Now if you're really into that whole Light of the Martyr thing, you probably want to grab this earlier, maybe like after you grab Protection of Tear or something. But again, I don't really recommend that, so I would grab this last, and then of course that would be it. Now as far as relics go, Shock Treatment is kind of your go-to. You really want this if you can help it. This is really good, but eye level is really important. So as a healer, having higher eye level means more intellect, which means it's just better. So in general, go for eye level, but if you have a choice, Shock Treatment, probably your number one. And then for AoE heals, I'd probably recommend Second Sunrise actually over Expel the Darkness, because it's just kind of 3% per level is a little low, and this does give you a better chance to get 2 Light Dawns in one, which is really quite powerful. But basically one of those two for AoE heals if you wanted to prioritize that and you couldn't get Shock Treatment, or if you want more single target heals and again you can't get Shock Treatment, then get a relic that gives you Deliver the Light. Now as far as stat priority goes, it's pretty simple. For Holy Paladin, crit is king, and basically the more crit you have the better, because when you crit with Holy Shock, you get that proc, of course, and that helps you do faster Holy Lights for mana efficiency, or bigger heals with Flash of Light. Now, there's probably like I don't know if I'd call it a soft cap, but it's probably good to have around 40% crit, at least, because that makes it so that when you are in Avenging Wrath, you have the 20% extra crit chance from Avenging Wrath, and double the 40% crit, which is 80%, which means you're always critting Holy Shock during Avenging Wrath, which is kind of nice to have. Obviously, anything above 50% crit, you're going to start to lose value because your Holy Shock will always crit, always. But crit is generally your best stat, so go with that most of the time. After that, between Mastery and Versatility, kind of depends on how well your raid group is stacked. If you can take advantage of the Mastery buff or stats properly, your raid is stacked, you always stay in range to get the full value, then this is your next best stat. Gives you a lot of extra throughput. Whereas if they're all spread out and they never stack and you can't get, mastery going on a lot of people, then versatility will be better because it just does a flat increase to your healing. Now, the way mastery works is simply, as I've said a couple times for this video, the closer you are to your target, the more you heal them. So, very simple. So if you can take advantage of this, go mastery after crit, and then if you can't, then go versatility. And then haste is just your worst stat in general, just not super useful. Now let's go ahead and talk about your healing rotation, if you will, or just kind of when to use your different spells. So you're going to be using Holy Shock, as I mentioned, pretty much all the time. It is your bread and butter. And basically if it's off cooldown, you want to use it. There are some exceptions, like if you have other spells you need to cast, of course, like cooldowns, but generally if you're not sure what to do and Holy Shock is available, you use it. So you're aiming for those Infusion of Light procs. so that you can either go faster with your Holy Light, like so, or go bigger with your Flash of Light. Now, which one you use depends on what you need. For heavier damage, if you need to spam emergency heals right on a tank or something, use Flash of Light. It's faster and it does more healing with the buff. And if you're trying to be more mana efficient, like you're not trying to drain your mana, then use Holy Light, or if the damage is pretty low, you can use that instead. And then outside of Holy Shock, generally you'll just be using Holy Light again if you're trying to be efficient, and Flash of Light if you're being less efficient. Now, as far as talents go, if you have Bestow Faith, like I said before, make sure you do use that when you're predicting damage is going to happen, like a timer on something or a dot's going to expire that's going to explode, stuff like that. Try to line it up with those things so you can take advantage of the full heal. But otherwise, just put it on a tank that's taking a lot of damage. That will generally do pretty well. As far as picking your beacon target, generally your tank is a good target, one of the tanks. If you're using Beacon of Faith, you put it on both tanks, one on one, one on the other. If you're not, make sure you switch it to an active tank. Say like tank swap like Defendra or something, right? One tank runs off, he stops taking damage except for the explosion, and then maybe you'll switch to the other tank because now he's actually actively tanking Defendra. Stuff like that. So just make sure you have it on someone who's actually taking damage so you're not wasting those free heals that it's giving out. And then that's pretty much it. Now if you're going to use Light of the Martyr, which again I don't generally recommend because if you crit really hard with it, you can put yourself in a pretty dangerous situation because it does damage to you. But you would use this if you're on the move and you already Holy Shocked, for example, and you're trying to single target heal someone, but you can't stop moving because of mechanic or something. You could Light of the Martyr then to try to help them out a little bit, top them off. But again, not entirely recommended. Some people love it, and if you do, that's totally fine, but in general, I wouldn't. Now, as far as AoE goes, you don't really have that much. You just have Lighted On, so basically use this when you can hit most of the people, most of the 5, so 4 to 5 people who need healing. Pretty simple. Use it for AoE. Try to point it in a good direction, though you do have to aim it properly. And if you're using Rule of Law, it's really good to use this before that so that it increases the range on the cone. So right now with Beacon of the Lightbringer, it's a little bit longer, it's 19 yards. If I pop Rule of Law, you see it's now a almost 30-yard cone in front of you. So 29-yard cone, pretty big. So it can be useful to use that if you're spread out and stuff. But basically you just use this for AoE healing. That's pretty simple. Now as far as your cooldowns go, Tears of Deliverance is somewhere in between single target and AoE healing cooldown. So you have to make sure you're pretty close to your target, say if you want to be healing the tanks with it, so they get more healing from your flashlight, holy light stuff, then you do need to be closer to them. It's only 15 yards, but even though it heals multiple people, it does heal them one at a time. It's kind of like a mini cooldown. It is free. It's also good for if you're trying to be mana efficient near the end of a fight if you're stuff like that. So it's kind of nice cooldown. It's pretty short, so feel free to use it either when your raid leader calls out for it, of course, or if you just need some extra kind of single target healing to pump up someone's health, like a tank. Avenging Wrath, pretty similar. You just use this whenever there's a lot of damage and you just want to, or if you want to pick up a single target really, really fast. It's a really, really powerful cooldown though, so generally you use it as a pretty hefty cooldown. It's 2-minute cooldown, but the usage is pretty simple. You just get more crit, more healing. And during this, remember that if you took Sanctified Wrath, your Holy Shot cooldown is cut in half. So you'll be using that a lot more. So that's just one thing to note when you do use that. And Holy Avenger, same thing. You just extra haste, so you get to cast faster. And you get more healing off of Holy Shock, which just makes it even more important to use all the time. And then finally, Aura Mastery. Generally, your raid leader will call for it, or just in a situation that you need it. If you took Devotion Aura, you definitely want to use this to prevent one-shot mechanics for the raid or group. And then if you took Aura of Mercy, just treat this like a big healing cooldown, like a kind of crappy Tranquility, if you will, or crappy Divine Hymn. So that's how you would use most of your spells in general, as far as healing goes. Now I'm going to go briefly over your DPS rotation before we get into demonstrating the healing, just for those who are interested in that. And in general, so you're going to go Crusader's Might for this, and Holy Avenger for cooldown, and then Sanctified Wrath definitely as well. Now, it's very, very basic. There's just a few spells, really. If you want to increase your damage a lot, of course you should be Flasked. You could Food Up, and probably use maybe a DPS trinket, for example, like Horn of Valor, that lines up very nicely with your wings. Then there's some sort of on-use where you get a big burst of damage. stuff like that. And then you can use Deadly Grace potions if you want to really, really boost it up, because that'll help your damage a lot. But essentially, you want to Holy Shock on cooldown, and you want to Crusader Strike after Holy Shock is on cooldown, because it'll be reducing that cooldown. And you want to do those with Judgment up as much as possible, because of that debuff that it does apply. So you'll Judgment, and then Holy Shock, Crusader Strike, and then try to do those as much as possible. And if you have dead time, you can drop Consecration, or if it's AoE, of course, you can drop Consecration as well. And then basically you want to use both your cooldowns, like your Avenging Wrath and Holy Avenger, and then go in with that. So you can do a pretty decent amount of damage with it, so I'll just do a brief demonstration here. So you pop your 2 cooldowns. I'll Judgment in first, get that debuff. Holy Shock, Crusader Strike, Holy Shock, Crusader Strike, Holy Shock, Crusader Strike, and just keep going like this for a little bit. That Judgment's up, so I'll put that debuff back up. Crusader Strike, because Holy Shock was down. Now here I have nothing to do, so I'll drop Consecration, then Crusader Strike again, and then you just kind of go through this over and over until, it just stops. Until you either stop, so you have to heal, maybe like in a dungeon or something, or, just keep going with that rotation, essentially, and use your cooldowns as they come up together. And so now we'll go ahead and take a look at a demonstration of some Holy Paladin healing in kind of Mythic Plus and raid situations, so you can see how that works. So here we are in a Mythic Plus. I'm using Beacon of Virtue, and I'm using Crusader's Might, but I don't really use it in this specific scenario. And I use Repentance just to try to CC. It does break, and I try again later, but it doesn't really work. But basically, I'm just healing, kind of applying heals. I stun something, now I put Beacon up, and I pop Wings, because I pop my cooldowns, just make sure, because I know the damage is coming. As soon as the pelters are free, there's a lot of damage going. So to keep up with it, I just try to spam a lot of Flash of Lights, not being efficient at all, because I'm basically worried about healing. Sometimes I use Holy Light just to be faster. And here, you see that Beacon of Virtue with like a Holy Shock, or just a little bit of healing. Does a lot. I do use Tears Deliverance to kind of help boost that healing, just kind of pseudo AoE, picking up people as they're close enough, and giving them that buff. And, you saw my Silver Hand buff gives that huge heal to the DK with my Holy Shock. And you use Light of Dawn when you need to. And basically just Virtue when there's a lot of AoE damage. And you can combine that with Light of Dawn, of course. And just other things like Holy Shock and your regular heals. There's not too many heals, so you pretty much use what you need to and react quickly. But you see how potent Beacon of Virtue is in these kinds of situations. That's pretty much how you'd heal. I use more cooldowns than I really normally would, but it's a very brutal pull, so I'm comfortable using them. So we are Heroic Ursolk, and it's just a pug group I found. So I'm using Bestow Faith and Beacon of Faith. You can easily make arguments for other talents, like Beacon of the Lightbringer, but I just knew the tanks were pretty squishy from previous pulls, so I decided to keep Beacon on both of them just to make sure they weren't dying from bad swaps and such. So I go ahead and just heal lightly here, just Holy Shock. I put Bestow Faith because I know he's going to get Rend Flash, assuming that they do the swap correctly. And just slowly Holy Light healing, nothing too ridiculous here. I know a charge is coming, but not much damage yet. So here comes the charge. So I Tears Deliverance in preparation as the tanks come back, and just heal up and Light of Dawn with Rule of Law, just to make sure I hit as many people as possible. And make sure you face your Light of Dawn in the appropriate direction, of course. So Tears Deliverance was like kind of a mini cooldown. It's not really AoE, but it does help some passive healing. Here, Light of Dawn again, because Cacophony just happened, just nice AoE damage to heal up. And then, Holy Shock on cooldown. In this case, I'm using Holy Light, just being efficient. The damage isn't that ridiculous right now. Light of Dawn again, because there's some AoE damage. Holy Shock on cooldown, and it's just basically the same thing over and over. It's just kind of when do you use your cooldowns, Like, I used Holy Avenger again later just to kind of heal up some damage. It's kind of a minor cooldown, really. Not super, super big. It's a short cooldown as well. So you can just do stuff like that and try to use Bestow Faith on things that do have predictable damage coming in. Like this guy has, the bleed on him for more than 5 seconds. I can put Bestow Faith on him. He's going to heal and probably give him some healing because he has that dot. And then you just see the damage Cacophony is up, so I'm ready to hopefully Light of Dawn soon when it's off cooldown in just a little bit. Turn, point as many people as I can, hit them, and then keep going like that. Now, you can use cooldowns. I know there's a charge coming, and I just kind of wanted to use a cooldown to show you guys what's up. And, I can save my Aura Mastery for a more deadly point. But you also don't want to sit on your cooldowns too long, unless your raid leader specifically tells you to. So, as you can see, Avenging Wrath, just doing a lot of healing potential with this cooldown, so it's one of your bigger ones. And then, at this point you can just check, oh, I've got Tears Deliverance up if I need it, I've got Aura Mastery, and you can just use your cooldowns as you need to. So I see a lot of damage coming out on this guy, so I bestow Faith out of kind of reaction, although it probably would have been better on the Warrior. And I use my Cavalier to get out here, my Divine Steed, rather. And so I know I'm taking damage, so I pop Sack on one tank, I pop Divine Protection just to help out, and then I pop Aura Mastery here because I'm running back in, so I don't have as much time to cast. And then, this picks everyone up, and it's kind of a smooth ride from there. So, you have a few spells, react to the damage, always Holy Shock and cooldown. If you're going to use Bestow Faith, make sure you're using it appropriately and smartly on damage that you can predict. And then, roll your cooldowns as appropriate, or as your raid leader asks you to. As far as macros, add-ons go, I do use some macros to help DPS as well as heal on the same button, so it's kind of a 2-in-1 macro. And I'll link these in the description below. I'll just link one of them, and you can just replace the spells with the ones you want. But for example, my Holy Light, same button. If I cast it on a helpful person, like either nobody or myself or a friendly target, it will cast Holy Light. And if I'm targeting an enemy, then the same button will cast Judgment. It's kind of nice, saves some bar space, and it just reacts to what you're targeting or not. And basically, we'll change the tooltip to whatever spell you want. And then after this help in brackets, you would change it to the spell you want to cast when targeting a friendly unit, like yourself or a party member. And then over here at the end, after the semicolon, is also the same spell you want to cast. So that's if there's no target. And then after the harm in brackets, then you pick the spell you want to cast when you're targeting an enemy. And it's kind of nice. You do get to, save some space. You could do it with other spells, like I could macro Consecration, and right now I have Bestow Faith and Crusader Strike on one of them, and then Holy Light and Judgment. Now I also do have Avenging Wrath macros, pretty simple, just so that if I'm using Horn of Valor for extra DPS, for example, then I just put them together in one button, so I don't have two separate buttons, because they're the same cooldown. Just make sure generally that they have the same cooldown, so the trinket needs to have like a 2-minute cooldown. Generally is the best way to use this. And I'll just leave this here. I'll put this in the description as well. That's pretty much it for macros. Now, as far as add-ons go, the main ones I used, you probably saw, were weak auras. Now, weak auras you can use to do a whole bunch of stuff. Right now I'm just tracking Judgment of Light, indicator and timer, so how long does it have left on the target if I'm looking at them. And then I have kind of these cooldowns and cooldown stacks for Crusader Strike, just for like DPS rotation to kind of help out. I definitely would also could recommend using like cooldown timers, which I probably should do soon, and just to show when Aura Mastery's up, when Tears Deliverance is ready, when Wings are ready, stuff like that. So you can use it to do all sorts of stuff. Very, very powerful add-on. Definitely check it out if you're interested in stuff like that. The add-on that pops the stuff up in the middle of my screen is Doom Cooldown Pulse. Don't really recommend it lately. It's been very inaccurate. But it's kind of fire and forget. It just flashes an icon when your spell is supposed to be off cooldown, although, like as I said, it's been kind of off lately. But also you can do that exact same effect in weak auras pretty simply, so don't really recommend that one too much, but it is there. And my action bars, Bartender 4. The UI is mostly default. I've got my unit frames. The party frames are just Blizzard defaults, which you can edit in interface and raid profiles down here. Just mess around with that stuff. I've got SCADA for damage meter, cooldown trackers, exorcist raid tools, which also does a lot of other stuff. And then I've got ORA 3, which I use for battle res, but it also has other stuff like ready checks and consumable checks, anything you like. That's pretty much it for this video. So if you liked it, feel free to hit it with a like. If you have questions or comments, feel free to leave those in the comment section below. And if you want to see when I post more content like this, or just in general, feel free to subscribe to the channel so you know when stuff is happening. And I hope you guys enjoyed. Thanks for watching, guys. See you next time. Cheers.